Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the United States Institute of Peace. Thank you for your patience as we just worked on a few technical difficulties before we could begin. My name is Susan Hayward, and I am the interim director of the Religion and Peacebuilding program here. And let me ask, first of all, if you have any noise-making devices, whether phones or kazoos, to turn them off for the duration of this session. So the Religion and Peacebuilding Center was created in 2000 in order to support the role of religious actors and organizations in zones of conflict, to transform drivers of violence, and to support sustainable peacebuilding efforts. And it was created out of recognition that religion matters, that it has an impact on politics and economics and on social dynamics that impact conflict and peace, but that the Western diplomatic sphere and the peacebuilding sector doesn't always engage with religion effectively or understand the religious dynamics and how they impact conflict and peace. So the program was created in order to help address that gap. And Libya actually presents a great case in point. In 2013, USIP, in partnership with the Office of Conflict and Stabilization at the State Department, did an assessment of peacebuilding work in Libya. And one of the outcomes, Joyce was a part of that, Joyce Casey from here at USIP, one of the outcomes of that assessment was recognition that religion matters, that the religious sector, including religious ideas, religious institutions, religious groups, religious political groups, had an impact on dynamics that were impacting the reform process and on various conflicts in the country, but that the national organizations and the international governments and organizations weren't engaging the religious sector. So they recognized that religion mattered and religion was influential, but they didn't have a good understanding of how religion, who exactly within the religious sector was influencing it in what ways, what their interests were, and then how to step within that sphere in order to engage effectively. And of course, we know that you can't just jump in to the religious sector in any zone of conflict, much like you can't jump into any sector, because any of these sectors become very politicized and very sensitive, the religious sector in particular. So who you engage with has consequences. How you engage, what kinds of issues you address have consequences. And you need to understand some of that, some of the background and some of the interests of various groups and various actors before you can engage effectively. So it was out of the recognition that religion was influential and that it mattered, but there was a lack of understanding and engagement with the religious sector to support the reform and peace process that we started this assessment and mapping exercise about a year ago. My colleague Palwasha is going to say a lot more about how this assessment has taken place over the year and how we've partnered with Zahra Langhi from the Libyan Women's Peace Platform for Peace. Is that right? Okay, the second one. In order to help advance this research and some of the conclusions that it's reached. The report is ongoing, and we hope to be able to make it public in the coming months, but they'll be able to give you a sneak peek today. And I should say that we had two goals or objectives in mind in doing this assessment. The first one was for the purpose of supporting peace in Libya, to be able to provide this mapping and assessment so that national organizations and actors and international organizations that wanted to support peace efforts in Libya would know who they could work with and how they could work and what the needs were within the religious sector. But there was a secondary interest as well, and that was for the larger field of religious peacebuilding. It was recognizing that increasingly, as governments, including our own, the US government, is seeking to engage more effectively with the religious sector to support peace and to transform drivers of violence, that it too, these governments and the peace field in general, needs to develop the methodology for doing these kinds of mappings and assessments to know how to do that work effectively. So we hope that out of this assessment we'll also gain some larger understanding of the methodologies that we can use to be able to step back and understand the religious sector in any zone of conflict before we begin to engage with it effectively. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Palwasha Kakar, who is the Senior Program Officer in our Religion and Peacebuilding effort and who has led this initiative in Libya over the past year. And Palwasha, in turn, will introduce Zahra to all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Susan. So what I'm tasked to do today is to give a little bit of the introduction to the methodology and some of the demographics of the people that we were able to survey in Libya before I turned over to Zahra and she talked a little bit more about the findings. Just to be clear, this research is the research of USIP, and Zahra was brought on board as a consultant to help in the analysis and the setup. And we hired independent local researchers based on criteria that we developed together in Libya. And so I'll go through the methodology a little bit right now. The research concept, as we started to do this research, and Susan so eloquently introduced, was to do an assessment to understand and evaluate the ongoing and potential contribution of Libya's religious sector to peace and justice. And the whole idea was so that we could develop recommendations for both local and international actors to strengthen the religious sector's contribution to peace and justice in Libya. And our objectives were to raise understanding of the religious sector's current and potential influence on peace and the democratic transition, and to identify and pursue avenues for engaging the religious sector, obviously, and then also to strengthen the religious sector's peace-building capacity in the future. So we came up with these 10 steps in the methodology. And actually this started even before I joined USIP. It started with desk-based research review, including looking at social media, websites, print and electronic media, and doing telephone interviews with diaspora Libyans, mainly in the United States, to really get a sense of what is the landscape, who are we talking about, what would be the appropriate questions to develop, to actually implement in Libya. And out of that, a Venn diagram mapping was developed of the different groups and a write-up of the findings historically and what currently was existing on the ground. Based on that, a questionnaire was developed, and that was later reviewed into a guide when we decided that we wanted to have semi-structured interviews for qualitative research. And then we developed a criteria for sampling, both who our target samples are and a criteria for the local researchers, which was done with the help of Zahra. And then we tried to train local researchers who we had sought out, and then implement the research. And the researchers themselves, after the research was implemented, they came together and presented the findings, the top findings that they themselves had based on the research that they did, and submitted the interviews to us. And those, again, in turn were then translated, and we're working on what we have. And right now, we're in this phase 9, or point 9, to present the findings for feedback to refine our analysis. So we hope that you can help us at this point as we present the findings to really be in dialogue to help us refine this. And we hope in the coming months, as Susan said, that we will have a product in terms of a final report. Just to share with you, this was a desk-based review in terms of the Venn diagram or the Venn map. So we were able to, at a higher level, have some sense of what the different religious sector actors were in Libya on the ground. I think it's pretty self-explanatory here. Let's see if I have a pointer. There we go. Starting here with the Grand Mufti and the Dar al-Ifta, and then on this side we have the Libyan Scholars Institution, the Justice and Construction Party, and the Libyan Islamic Group. And then as we go, we see the militias down here, the Awqaf Ministry and GNC committees of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs, Islamic universities and religious education institutions, local imams and religious figures in the local and shura councils, the League of of Libyan ulama and the Higher Council for Sunni Sufism in Libya. This is just a general, to give us a general sense of who's on the ground and who we might want to interview as we go forward. And this was done, this desk review, of course, was done in early 2014. So then we were able to develop a qualitative question guide with 12 semi-structured questions to guide the researcher. They weren't supposed to be asked, it was just supposed to be a guide, really to help us get to who in the religious sector does what in relation to peace and how they do it. And the two main points were, what is the religious sector's current and potential influence on peace and democratic transition, and how can we engage the religious sector in current and future peace and justice programming in the country. Our sample criteria was propulsive, so that participants were selected because they were likely to generate useful data, and we tried to have maximum variation in the sample. The list of people, of types of people that we wanted to interview, or target people that we wanted to interview, is, as you can see here, traditional religious leaders, those who are identified in this survey as religious leaders, or people that people might go to for guidance, members of government-based religious institutions and universities, members of political parties, which include those who are currently in government or representatives, and civil society that is engaged with religious leaders and institutions, then tribal and community leaders, militia members, and legal advocates and scholars. Our target coverage, this is, as you can see on the map, the larger circles are where we were trying to get more interviews, and the smaller circles we were attempting to get some coverage in those areas as well. Our target was to have 12 researchers, each doing 20 interviews, so that we would have a total of 240 interviews. And as you can see at the bottom, this was our aim, was to have 4 from the west, Tripoli Zawiya area, 3 from Benghazi, 2 from the Amazigh area in the Western Mountains, and 3 from Sabha. So we had some problems in terms of getting coverage. The time that we were out there was between May, or our researchers were doing this research, was between May and August of 2014. We ended up putting our net out broad and asking about 15 researchers to work with us. But we only had 11 researchers that were able to contribute. A lot more interviews were done than were able to be submitted to us. So we had a total of 180 interviews or transcripts that were actually submitted to us, because people had problems due to the insecurity to actually get the interviews out of Libya to bring them to us. And then we also had people who were unable to continue doing it because of the security situation on the ground. And the gender ratio was pretty much 60-40. We had about 60% men and 40% women respondents, or people who were interviewed. The samples, in terms of the breakdown of those 8 categories that I told you, are here. We had about, the largest percentage is civil society. And then civil society that engages with religious leaders. And then, as you can see, we had the 17%, which is members of political parties or people who are in representatives in government and those sort. We had both 11% of the traditional religious leaders and then 3% of those who are identified, so a total of 13% religious leaders that were interviewed. Legal advocates were 10%, militia members were 7%, and so on and so forth. You see this tribal leaders were also about 3% interviewed there. So just to touch upon the challenges a little bit before I turn it over to Zahra. The interviews, like I said, took place between May and August 2014. And this meant that when I actually went in May to try and do the training for the researchers, I had to leave because of the fighting that happened at that time. So we had to do our trainings through Skype and over the internet, and try and be inventive in terms of how we actually get the information to the researchers on the ground. The fighting really affected the researcher training, and so in that sense, The language in the question guide, we weren't able to pilot it as much as we had wanted to. And so there were some problems with the language. But we were hoping that because it's a semi-structured interview, that they wouldn't go directly. And some researchers did use some of the language directly, and some didn't. And especially when we were talking about religious trends in one of the questions, it threw people off because one of the examples that we wanted them to keep in mind was different kinds of influences of religious trends, and it sort of threw people off in how they were thinking about this when they actually described all the religious trends we gave examples of. The researchers had limited mobility due to the fighting, so they weren't always able to conduct face-to-face interviews, and some of the interviews had to be conducted over Skype or through email. And then researchers were unable to get the research to us. Like I said before, we received less interviews than were actually conducted in some areas. In some areas, we had less coverage than we had been hoping for, such as Misrata and Zawara. And with this, I would like to turn it over to my dear friend and colleague, Zahra Langhi, who has been our consultant and analyst on this. Just to give a brief bio sketch of Zahra's background, I'm sure you can read more in the bio, but she is not only a strategist, a human rights advocate, an academic, and a researcher, but she's really done a lot in the field of gender and state building, has contributed to the study and understanding of Islamic history, metaphysics, and female spirituality in comparative religions. She is the co-founder and the director of the Libyan Women's Platform for Peace, a social political movement which aims at peace building, inclusivity, and gender equality. Langhi led the initiative of the vertical and horizontal zipper list in the elections of the National Congress in January 2012, which resulted in women winning 17% of the National Congress in July 2013. In December of 2013, through the Libyan Women's Platform for Peace, she coordinated the first meetings between civil activists, senior members of armed revolutionaries, senior security and intelligence officers, and parliamentarians on DDR and SSR. In January 2015, Langhi spearheaded the launch of the Charter of the Libyan Women's Constitutional Rights through Libyan Women's Platform for Peace. With that, I will turn it over to Zahra.
Salam wa rahma alaikum jami'an. I'll speak in English, don't worry. First of all, want to thank USIP and particularly my colleague Palwasha and all the department on peace building and Susan and everybody and Melissa for their real partnership on this project and allowing for local voices to take part in this important research. I really appreciate their flexibility and openness to hear from us, the local researchers. I also like to thank our unit of local researchers for their bravery and resilience to take part of this project in such a critical times. I here also want to make a special note and remember our youngest researcher in this local unit of researchers, Tawfiq bin Saud, who was part of this research and who was assassinated just the day before International Day of Peace in September, last September. First of all, I'd just like to say that this is not, I'm not representing findings. They're rather inconclusive. This is why we think this meeting, and it is recorded, we want to hear more from you all and to get feedback on how to make the final tunings on the research, insight, and findings. And I think it is more of a process and will continue to be of a process, especially for the complexities in such a fluid situation as Libya is today. So we really appreciate any kinds of comments you do have, yani. And this, after all, will be representing a certain point of view. For the very first time, I will be reading. There's always a first time for everything. And I think since the research is, there are a lot of details, and I don't want to miss some of the details and get stuck on something, so I'd rather have something in front of me. I'd just like to give a very flash introduction into Libya's religious map before, during the independence and Gaddafi's time, and just to introduce to the current situation and the potential one. And while I'll be reading the insights and the final recommendations, I'll be qualifying them as I'm reading with you, because a lot has changed over the past few months, even over the last week. So, as already my friends have and colleagues have highlighted, the importance of the religious discourse and the religious actors in the scene of Libya, either in posing, peace building, or in inciting violence. We were very flexible, and as my friend and colleague was explained, the methodology of the research was qualitative, so it was not a yes or no an answer. The questions were even changed by the researchers, and the interviewees themselves took part of how to pose the question, and sometimes felt that the question is not right, it's not correct, it needs to be addressed in another way. The terms do not reflect the situation in Libya, or they're overloaded, or they're Western imposed. So it was a dynamic process. For the religious composition of Libya, Libya has been a mixture of, I'm talking now a very short background on Libya before the 1969 coup or revolution of Gaddafi. The religious combination in Libya has been a mixture of the Maliki madhab, in so much as jurisprudence is concerned, the Ash'arite doctrine, in so much as theology is concerned, and the Shadhili Sufi order, and it's all very diverse subsequent variations, Asmari, Sunusi, they're all variations of the Shadhili Sufi order, and in so much as ethics, and this is in so much as ethics and mysticism is concerned. So Libya's traditional religious map has been basically an integral part of the wider North African religious map. Socio-religiously, Libya's predominant religiosity has been characterized by respect of religious diversity. Libya prior and during the independence era was home to Jews, Italian and Greek Christians, as well as Muslims with diverse madhabs and Sufi orders. There were other Sufi orders, the Rifa'iyya, the Isawiyya, the Qadiriyya. Libyans never had dwelt in strictly or sharply divided religious orbits. Consequently, an individual Libyan would not be a follower of a religious leader, as in the case of strictly or sharply divided sectarian communities in other countries. Further, while respecting the perspectives of sheikhs, the vast majority of Libyans do not draw on individual sheikhs in building their political religious ethos. Traditional religious authority was never personified in individuals, but rather in abstract ways of life and religiosity. Religious authority has been blended with tribal authority. And when I'm using authority here, I'm using it as a persuasive moral authority and not institutional authority. Absorbent, pious Libyans enjoy both a traditional tribal and religious legitimacy at once. By the same token, religious authority has been blended with ethnic authority. Pious ethnic elderly, Arab or Amazigh or Tuareg, enjoy both a traditional ethnic and religious legitimacy at once. In short, traditionally and culturally speaking, we should always bear in mind the inseparability of religious and cultural and traditional tribal and ethnic authorities. One cannot speak of religious authority in the strict sense of the word. As early of Gaddafi's rule, now we're moving fast to Gaddafi's rule, and it's tied with the wave of Arab nationalist modern Arab nationalist movements. Though Gaddafi claimed to resurrect Islamic rule based on the Quran, a campaign was launched against traditional Islamic authorities and institutions. Muhammad bin Ali Sunusi University in Bayda was shut down. Islamic studies departments in other universities were also closed. In the name of the Cultural Revolution, Sufi shrines and ancient traditional mosques were desecrated, such as the shrine of Al-Mahdi Sunusi in 1984, and Sidi Hamouda Mosque, as well as the shrine of and the library annexed to it in the mid-80s. The office of Al-Mufti was also abolished in 1983 after the humiliation and a protest of revolutionary committees of the Mufti Tahir al-Zawi. And I'm saying this because this is the same scene we're seeing today in the name of another revolution that is tied not with Pan or Arab nationalism, but it's tied this time with political Islam. And so here I would say the themes, or because I will be using it throughout the paper and the insights, what is called modernistic Islam, or what today some parties call secularism, and we rather say modern Islam, or rather than saying secularist or liberals, because this might be debated, and another form of fundamentalist Islam or political Islam. There's the third component of Islam, which used to be in Libya before, which is the traditionalist or traditional Islam. So these are all in the Libyan scene, and they are sometimes they are intersected. It's not that we only have the modernist Islam or secularist or the fundamentalist or good Muslims or bad Muslims. Sometimes the scene is more complicated in terms of the ideology itself, and in individuals themselves, and how these elements of fundamentalism, modernism, and tradition influence the discourse of a certain ideology and the individual himself or herself. So as of the 80s, the map of Libya, religious mosaic, and the map of religion, religious authority began to undergo even more radical change and transformation after the return of hundreds of Libyans who participated in the Soviet-Afghan War 1979, 1989, and its aftershocks, and the hundreds of Libyans who participated in the American-Iraqi War 2003 to 2008 and its aftershocks, and after the return of Libyans who resided in the Gulf, a new ethos mixture gained existence. This ethos, its base draws upon the late Hanbalites, and of Ibn Taymiyyah, of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and the modernist activist or religious political Islamist leaders like Hassan al-Banna, Sayyid Qutb. The components of such a trend were packed in the framework of religious political movements. 20th century movements of political religion gained presence in Libya, including the Muslim Brothers, and later with the Islamic fighting group and the Qaeda and all the variations until today we have ISIS. So Libyan fighters also returning from Afghanistan in the late 80s began operating in Libya for the very first time. The jihadist Salafists fighting groups like Al-Muqatila, Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, was established in 1990 and began a campaign against Gaddafi that would last throughout the decade before being wiped out by Gaddafi's military, though eventually its leaders in prison, Abdul Hakim Bilhaj, Sami Saadi, made some revisions under the patronage of Saif al-Gaddafi with the help of the Muslim Brothers leaders such as Dr. Ali Salabi and Sheikh Sadiq al-Gharyani, who are very important personas in Libya's or religious actors in the Libyan scene today. A main pillar of such a new mixture is upholding of this mixture of a new discourse, a religious discourse, and I'm talking again about the political Islam or fundamentalist Islam, whatever term you feel comfortable with, as opposed to the modernist Arab nationalist and as opposed to the traditionalist Islam. This new mixture that is basically the main pillars of it upholding a hegemonic or monolithic view of Islam. Its rejection of diversity, not necessarily out of its rejection of the diversity. It's sometimes posing a new modernistic, positivistic view. So sometimes in the case of moderate voices of this political Islamic discourse like the Muslim Brothers, it's also a monolithic view of Islam. In some of the variations of political Islam, it has a resort to violence, like in the case of Al-Qaeda or the Islamic fighting groups before the revisions. Such a trend was able to make its presence felt in more marginalized, urban, less tribal spots like Derna, where jihadi Salafism was predominant, where in cities like Tripoli or Misrata, quietist Salafism was predominant. To sum up, 4 decades of totalitarian, revolutionary tyranny and oppression of traditional modes of religious authority, alongside with the rise of the Salafist and Islamist ideology in the country, have created a state of religious ambivalence. So moving quickly to what is the religious discourse, the theme of our research. What is the religious discourse or the role of religious actors, the current role of religious actors and their potential role in peace and in peace building and the democratic transition in Libya? Generally, the religious discourse has a strong potential to influence a peace and democratic inclusive transition in Libya. Libyan society is a society where it respects religion and respects religious authority. However, actors representing the traditional religious leaders have not yet seriously been contributing to peace building or democratic inclusive transition. The Libyan governments and the former, now we're talking about the former National Congress General, have frequently sought the good offices of tribal elderly sheikhs in mediating disputes during the past 3 years, and have actually proved to play an important role in reconciliation, especially in aspects related to the the oil ports. On the other hand, the output of this new radical extremist religious trend has already inflicted a serious multifaceted damage on the Libyan society. I will just now say some of the points of this extremist perspective. It's the emphasis on points of exclusionism and absence of a tolerant approach which would respect diversity of religious perspectives, decline of traditional scholarship and the rise of ideology. Islam here becomes more often a political ideology more than it is a scholarship, which only breeds sentimentalism, fanatical rejectionism, polarization, and fragmentation. Resort to violent choices in the cases of the most militant political Islamic groups. The non-recognition of traditional religious authorities, domestically and regionally, non-recognition of the political process and the democratic institutions. We've seen that with Ansar al-Sharia and with the Council of Thawar Benghazi and the Council of Thawar Darna as well. Insistence on self-armament and rejection to submit arms to the political authority. Non-recognition of the role of women in reform at all. Dominance of a positivistic, reductionist, utilitarian interpretation of the Quran and the Sunnah, and unidimensional reductionist perspective of the Sharia, which reduces it to hudud, harsh penalties. Excommunication and takfir, inquisition, etc., and assassinations in the name of religion. The basic, I will be now addressing the basic, some of the fundamental insights of our research findings, which I claim they are still inconclusive. And while I'm stating them, because this is something that was written 4 months ago and everything is changing, so I will be, while reading them, qualifying the changes that are unfolding today. Most Libyans identify themselves as Libyans. These are now the insights and the findings of the questions of this research. Most Libyans identify themselves as Malikis, Libya's Sunni traditional form of Islam. This does not include, however, Amazigh or Tuareg, who follow the Abadi madhab. Most Libyans interviewed perceive Libyan religious identity as moderate, and they rather use the term moderate rather than liberal, which for them has obscure and negative connotations. Libyans do not dwell in strictly or sharply divided religious orbits, as the case was before this revolution. Consequently, an individual Libyan would not be a follower of one religious leader in the case of strictly sharply divided sectarian communities in other countries. Further, while respecting the perspectives of sheikhs, the vast majority of Libyans do not necessarily draw on individual sheikhs in building their political religious ethos. Religious authority is blended, at least this is what they are saying. Yani. It might, because let's bear in mind that this is all about perspectives, their own perspectives. We're reading perspectives, and so it's perspectives and it's not facts. Religious authority is blended with tribal authority. Pious tribal or religious tribal elderly enjoy both a traditional authority, a traditional tribal, as well as religious legitimacy at once. By the same token, religious authority has been blended with ethnic authority. Religious ethnic elderly, Arab or Amazigh, enjoy both a traditional ethnic and religious legitimacy at once. In short, traditionally and culturally speaking, we should always bear in mind the inseparability of religious and cultural, traditional, tribal, and ethnic authorities. Contrary to the claims of some modern Western surveys that Sufism is a minority sect in Libya, Sufism is rather organically blended in the hybrid religious identity of Libyans. An important example from history is the Sunusi movement, one on which ethos the Libyan monarchy was erected. Sunusi movement was an Ash'arite, Sufi, Maliki movement. Rabitat Ulama Libya, the League of religious scholars of Libya, tends to be the closer to this kind of religious composition. Most Libyans respect traditional religious leadership or authority and accept their role in peacebuilding and reconciliation. Religious leaders have yet failed to play a role in peacebuilding and establishing an inclusive democratic transition. Religious ideologues, and I'm using here ideologues because I was referring earlier to the rise of political Islam or fundamentalist Islam, or the, kind of an Islamic discourse that basically was based on the grievances of Muslims at the wake of the post-colonial era. So it is more centered around ideology now than Islamic scholarship. Religious ideologues, political Islamists, have actually contributed to societal polarization and inciting violence. Of course, that needs to be further looked into, and to see the variations of political Islam, because not all political Islam could be put in one basket. And we're focusing on the religious actors. This does not ignore that other actors, non-religious, or their discourse is not centered on religion, that they have a role in inciting violence as well in Libya. There's no trust in religious ideologues, however. This came really clear in the findings that are still inconclusive in political Islamists, with all their variations, including the most moderate of them, including the Muslim Brothers. Whether that is fair enough or not fair enough, but this is the attitude of at least the sample of Libyans, that this mistrust of political Islamists and ideologues, including Muslim Brotherhood. Modernistic religious ideologues with all their variations, Muslim Brotherhood, jihadist Islamists, including Libyan Fighting Group, and quietist Salafism, share the perspective of a monolithic religious identity, which is exclusionist to the traditional units of identities, such as the tribe. Still at the moment, including the most moderate of the political Islamists, the relationship between the tribe and all traditional units of identity, like the tribe, has not been accommodated, or there has no been the relationship between political Islamists and these traditional units of identity has not reconciled yet. And this is why the overwhelmingly discourse of the political Islamists is more of a modernist, crushing the any possible role of tribes. Thus, their ideologies have failed to resonate with populations, specifically in tribal areas. Which tend to be reluctant to espouse any foreign ideology, and they look at the the Salafi jihadists as an Afghani ideology, the Muslim Brotherhood as an international or an Egyptian ideology. This is the attitude specifically in tribal areas. Of course, if we're, and I will deal with the two, and I will bring you back to the scene today. Jihadi Salafism does not have real resonance in Libya as well in general, and especially in tribal communities which are geographically located. Tribal communities which are geographically located, because there are tribal communities or those who go back to tribal lineage, but they live and dwell in cities, and so the impact of the tribe is not that influential as if one is living in a tribal geographically based community. So if you are from Warfella, originally from Warfella, and you live in Benghazi, the influence of the tribe is not that powerful, whereas if you're a Bani Walid living in Bani Walid, whereas Warfella is based, the influence of the tribe is really influential. And so the expectation of the tribe to play a role is higher. This is the jihadi Salafis does not have a real resonance in Libya in general, especially in tribal communities which are geographically located. This is basically the elders, because the elders are capable of enforcing excommunication of those individuals who threaten the social cohesion of their communities. Quietist Salafism tends to be more resonant than jihadi Salafism. However, its advocates tend to be influenced by foreign sheikhs, primarily from Saudi Arabia. And the role of quietist Salafis has changed over the course when we've finished our report. The quietist Salafis, their take on politics was basically they were apolitical, and they were not engaged in any of the political dispute ever since the revolution. And even their slogan is called in Arabic, "Ilzam Baitak," stay at home, do not get engaged. This is fitna. However, with the attack on and the assassinations of army officers, and sometimes it's linked to tribal aspects, we've seen that these quietist Salafis now are waging a kind of jihad on the jihadist Salafis, seeing them as Kharijites. So they are taking more part of the conflict at the moment. And they're all also taking part and waging war against the Muslim brothers as well. So we're seeing variations and fractions within the, if we call it fundamentalist Islam. And so all now are engaged in political kind of war against each other. And especially the group called Madakhila. And so they're taking part at the moment in the camp of Karama operation, because I'm not sure, Palwasha, you've made it clear that we started this project on the ground when Karama just started, Karama operation, and then there was the Fajr operation. So a lot of the religious actors have re-articulated their positions and their alliances, and have taken new roles in this dynamics of conflict in Libya today. So the quietists are not anymore quietists. And with the rise of the Sahawat is, I'm sure something that the same thing we've seen in Iraq, where they were armed by the Americans to confront the Qaeda. And so with the launching of the Karama operation and with the new engagement of the Salafis, the quietist Salafis, and seeing this is a war against Kharijites, and with all the dynamics of the proxy war as well, has changed the dynamics. And the Sahawat, it's interesting because it has a tribal composition into it. And I remember very well when we were working on this project, what we had in mind that the tribe would play a positive role, and I still count on that in peace building, in reconciliation. But we're seeing another role now of some of the tribes, at least, in taking part of this war, and some of the whatever, the militias or the forces of Karama or the forces of even Fajr are tribally have a tribal affiliation or regional affiliation. And so the rosy romantic idea we had in mind of a tribe might play a role. It's very fluid and changing by the day. The religious leadership of the Islamist militias is more decentralized. Now we're talking about Islamic militias, as each brigade tends to have its own sheikh, who would be the head of the brigade as well. So there's no centralized authority, and it's all fragmented. The interviews from Derna seem to highlight back then, I'm not sure now, that jihadi Salafis are attempting to integrate tribal traditional elements to enforce their rule. Not clear how successful they are in so doing. With the rise of ISIS in the scene, a transnational movement that is basically not only threatening the nation state, but the traditional units of identity as well. So and it has a very strong hold in Derna. Though the news from Derna is contradictory. We are hearing that there's a kind of a conflict between the Shura Council of Mujahidi Derna and ISIS. So it's not clear the local jihadists, relationship between the local jihadists and transnational movement like ISIS. There seems to be no national consensus on recognized religious leadership. Dar al-Ifta, personified in the Mufti Sheikh al-Gharyani, has become very controversial, as Sheikh al-Gharyani has been contributing to political polarization, inciting violence. His fatwas regarding political exclusion, federalism, his recent fatwas statements supporting Fajr are indicators of what most Libyans perceive as politicization of fatwa and religion, which most they consider to be negative. This was, of course, like 7 months ago. I think the percentage of how the Mufti is seen at the moment is worse by most sides, let's say, and with the latest statements by ISIS to target the Mufti tells us a lot that it's a fragmented. There's no unified camp that we can call fundamentalist Islam or political Islam, and all at the moment are waging war against each other. The League of Religious Scholars of Libya, Rabitat Ulama Libya, is perceived as according to this research, as a moderate representation of Libyan religious identity. It is far less controversial than Dar al-Ifta, though it was not well known enough, let's say, in most of the interviews. Its other fatwas on disarmament, on armed protests, on respect of the right to assembly, countering, all these were met with khalas, and I'm done. Rabita is more influential in the south. The question of women's rights seems to be irrelevant when it comes to religious discourse. However, ever since that, our work after this research, we've been more engaged with we partnered with USIP and Rabitat Ulama Libya and Al-Azhar and civil activists on working on the women's rights between the Sharia and the international conventions, and it eventually yielded in the launching of the Charter of Libyan Women's constitutional rights. I will stop here, and I will not mention the recommendations, but and I will keep it for our questions and answers. It's what we are trying to do after this and after our initiative on working with religious leaders, traditional religious leaders, is to have an approach that is more inclusive to the whole process of peace making or peace building, that links counter-violent extremism with humanitarian dialogue, humanitarian development, sustainable development with resilience framework as well, giving more a role for women and youth to play a role and to engage with religious leaders as well. And so I'll stop here. Thank you.
All right, so we wanted to open the floor to questions. Susie, do you want to moderate, or should I moderate? How should we do?
Susan should moderate.
Okay. All right, I can moderate, that's fine. Would anyone like to start? Yes?
Yeah, thank you very much for a very enlightening presentation, really, because you had a lot of history to cover, first of all, and now you have a very complicated environment to really try to understand or actually relate to the audience. But, oh, yeah, thank you. It seems to me that there are, the project itself, as far as I'm concerned, is excellent. It really should go forward, obviously, but it seems to me that there are a lot of factors here that could be influential. I'm sure they are influential in how you, number one, you frame the questions to whomever you are trying to get to, or how to frame understandings of the issues at hand, really, and consequently how you may recommend this thing or that. But just a few things. First of all, we really are trying to understand an environment where the previous regime has abolished anything called state institutions. So, in other words, you're talking to a population that really did not have institutions to speak of. They didn't have institutional memories, they didn't have institutional norms and norms of behavior, so to speak. So, whenever you are asking them about a very established institution called religion, they may not be necessarily very, number one, knowledgeable of it, or knowledgeable of the limits of it to really limit the discussion of it. The second one is the issue of regional influences. When we speak of Salafis, jihadi Salafis, quietist Salafis, and all these people, these are people who have transnational relations. They always do. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. And when we speak of Salafis and their relationship with the tribes or anything like that, I mean, generally speaking, Muhammad Abdul Wahhab early on in the 18th century did not believe that tribes are Islamic enough. You know, he actually accused them of heresy, of being heretical. They're not necessarily good regarding religion. So obviously now, when you look at Salafis, they really are not going to have very good relations with the tribes because the tribes don't believe that they are good people anyway, and vice versa. The third thing is the issue of the armed militias. Armed militias, jihadists, these are people of all kinds of kind of jihadists from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from all kinds of places. And now they are sprouting more jihadists even. So you are talking about these people who are not organized religiously speaking. Each one of them has their own sheikh, their own leader and stuff. But at the same time, they're the ones with the arms. The people who are supposedly, who have the scholars who know about religion and who understand Islam itself are the people who don't have arms. In other words, the ones who are scared. So there needs to be a balance of some sort between the one who is carrying the weapon and doesn't know really what religion is about, and the one who really knows what religion is about but is afraid of the guy who has the weapon. I'm sorry I took too much time, but thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Zahra, do you want to respond to anything? I don't know if I can pull this mic.
Okay, these are valuable comments. They're not questions that needs answers for me. And I think the question of, or your comment on institutions, it's interesting, and I don't have an answer, to tell you the truth. And I don't think in pre-modern societies, we had what we can call religious institutions, as in the case of Western societies. And I do believe that Khalid Abul Fadl addressed that issue, and Al-Hallaq even more, when he talks about authoritative discourse and authoritarian discourse, or authoritative discourse and authoritarian fatwa. And I think we have been facing this problem between authoritative and authoritarian. The Grand Mufti, with his role that he has been given by the NTC with authority of the law of Ifta, gave him more role to play such a powerful role, and he did have an influence on certain militias. However, his role throughout the 4 years has been resented now that he is, I've heard, like, he's not coming out for the last 3 weeks from his, to go to his office. And so sometimes, even when you do have an institution, when the culture of the people does not recognize religious institutions, it will not play an influential role, sustainable at least. The other thing with the tribe, you're absolutely right. However, Saudi Arabia is a kingdom that was based on both the tribe, the alliance between the tribe and the Wahhabism. The same in Libya with the Sunusis. It was some kind of an alliance was made between the tribes and the Sunusi Tariqa, which the founder goes back even to Algeria. He's not, and he was at the end the king, made the king of Libya, and he unified Libya, and he basically built the modern nation state. So it is possible. With the militias, I absolutely agree with you. The idea of they're disintegrated, and but there still. This is why when I mentioned the whole idea of moral or soft authority, it is still present, and this is why the value of this research. We still believe that the soft authority has still power over the hardcore authority, which is arms.
Next question. I believe you had your hand up, and then we can go to you. Maybe we'll take a third one. Is there another person after? Third? Okay, so in that order. Please go ahead. You can use your mic.
Very interesting project, and I'm delighted to come and learn and look forward to the final publication and to see what it comes out. I'm a scholar, I'm a professor at George Mason University in the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution, and I do qualitative research. So one of the things that I would recommend to you
That's your question.
is to look, if you look back at your slide having to do with the methodology, what you've got is a research question or a research intent. And then you've got a data collection procedure, and you jumped over any analytic framework you would need to make sense of the data. So I would recommend, based on what I think you're trying to do, that you look at frame analysis, because I think it would allow you to pull forward the important frames of your that are coming out of the findings, and then that would really ground what you're trying to do. And there's really, I can give lots of, I can give you some resources if you're interested. That or there's some work on storylines, looking at, what are the core and dominant storylines and what are the marginal ones and how they relate to each other. But I think frame analysis would be really tidy for you folks, and it would work as an analytic framework, which you currently don't have. I think this would be important to actually consolidate your methodology and pay attention to it, because the title of the work is on countering. And I don't think countering is going to get clear. I don't think you're going to have clarity on the recommendations unless you can consolidate clarity on the frames. And so I was thinking, well, how does any kind of countering work? Countering works through the development of new storylines. That's just what it is. It's the development of new frames that, reorganize the way in which a frame field or a field of meaning is fractured. And that's your story was about how it's currently fractured, which is super interesting to think about how you would go about combining things or suggest things that would alter those divisions, so that perhaps, as you talked about the soft moral authority, once you know the moral frameworks that are there, it's a question of who's speaking them and how to sort of reorganize who they're talking to. I think the countering would be clear if the frames were.
Yeah, just to add, that's very helpful, and definitely I'll follow up with you on what you're talking about. But the reason why we added this, the countering part, is actually because Zahra has been working on this, and we were hoping that she could actually get to the presentation of some of the recommendations in the counting part, but she didn't have a chance to. I don't know if that's something, maybe if we see that we have time in the end, that's something she can actually get to, because that's what she's been working on.
But the research was on peace building.
Yeah, it was on peace and justice, and the counterpart was what she took from the research and worked herself on with the Libya Women's Platform for Peace. But anyway,
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I was just wondering if knowledge in itself is a good thing. If it influences the results. And,
Let's take one more question.
For example, Sufis have a lot of knowledge, but they are almost powerless. And the ISIS did not have a lot of knowledge, but they are very active on the ground. So analysis, for example, is a means of soft power. And is soft power influential on the ground? Most likely not. And so a hard power is, if you look at the example of ISIS or other groups. So knowledge for me is something that's produced in the confines of an academic school, but countering happens on the ground. So do you think that in order to give the audience a good recommendation, do you think that the research should be based on the fact that actually the ones who have the guns are the ones who are contributing to peace on the ground?
Can we take one more question and then we'll have you answer?
Hi, thank you. I guess gender equality isn't challenging enough. This is amazing. I applaud your work. It's what I'm trying to understand is, do you see, obviously you approach this from a bias, and your bias is to promote peace as a value. And do you benchmark or do you see models that are successful or are going in the right direction elsewhere in the Arab world or in the world in general from other religions that give any kind of suggestions of strategies to implement in trying to promote and to basically incorporate and to engage religious actors in this task of peace building.
Do you want to answer those two questions?
Yeah, but if you have something.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think and I will link to the questions because I think they're related. Your question on the knowledge, or what I call the scholarship, the traditional Islam as a discourse that it was centered around scholarship, values, charity, compassion, all these issues, and which has a kind of what I called soft or moral authority, and on the other hand, what we have today, ISIS, which is seems very much modernistic and progressive in terms of its at least propaganda and technological tools and arms as well. I think, I'm not sure, as you said, I never deny that I am a person with bias, and I am a stakeholder at the political scene at the moment. I do see, at the end, ISIS will end as a footnote to Islamic history. And it is a power at the moment. However, it will not be a sustainable power. Soft moral power, the traditional Islam, I see that they will be more sustainable. However, and this is what I did not cover in my presentation, I do not think they can counter the violent extremism alone. They need to be engaged, and to get back to your question, with the resilient local voices that have been confronting alone, like our colleague Tawfiq. His last tweet was, we will soon see the end of you, Kharijites. And he got assassinated for that tweet. So it is these local resilient voices that use the social media that need to have a partnership with these soft moral authority, the traditional religious leaders. And this is a project that we, after this research project, was the women's rights in Libya between Sharia and International Convention, and to go beyond the polarization that is seen at the moment, the modernist or secularist and the fundamentalist or political Islamists. There's something in between. And that between is the religious traditional leaders, and most importantly, the resilient young women and men in Libya. And that's how we propose to present a new way of counter-violent extremism that is, we link it to resilience, to peace building. It's all together, and it's working on, like our other project, the latest that came out last week, a crisis response strategy that is built on the idea of inclusive peace building.
Yes. Right. More questions? Yes, and I'll take another one. Is anyone? And anyone? Okay. You, yourself, and then the two. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I can only imagine the challenges in trying to conduct research in Libya in the last 8 months, so I congratulate you on that. My question is about the support or the recognition for the democratic process and negotiations. Considering that right now the UN-led process is probably the closest thing there is to some kind of conflict resolution or peace in the long term. I wonder if you considered in your research, or if it has translated in the results, the position of the various religious groups, and you included a number of them, from the Muslim Brotherhood all the way to I think you mentioned Al-Qaeda, for example, their relationship to the democratic process, their relationship to negotiations, to also distinguish between the various actors. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Zahra.
And Palwasha and Melissa and the team. We just help in reading the insights.
Could you guys give us just some more texture in terms of the questionnaire? What are some questions that you guys asked specifically? And then I know you had a diagram about the percentage that you guys interviewed, so that among them were of religious actors or political parties themselves. Do you guys have any anecdotal stories or any anecdotal findings of the people who are maybe Islamists and part of the political parties or militia groups, and how they perceive themselves vis-a-vis peace building, if even? Again, I mean, this research came at a time where the country imploded and is in a civil war, so I can imagine it was very, very sensitive. But if you have any examples of that, that would be helpful. And then I have just two more questions. And just from the initial groupings of the various individuals and entities, I mean, who amongst the religious actors are promoting peace today and are rising above this political polarization and fray, if any? I would love to hear your experience in that. And then finally, countering violent extremism. I mean, now with Daesh on the scene, but even before that with Ansar Sharia and the rejectionist jihadi trend, I mean, we see militaristic options, but what are other ways of countering and confronting this?
You get the first one.
We have two more questions. I think it was your turn next, sir, and then yours.
I don't know if you still want more questions after our last questions here. Thank you. Very enlightening, and certainly I think this is a new angle on the Libya situation and current conflict. But if I may, I think it would be rather important to have a reflection on the historic context of the Senussi movement in Libya and how it helped shape the nation of Libya in the process. Because I think in doing so, we will find that we're truly today seeing and living a clash of sorts of religious powers. And there is the passive resistance of the Libyan society that predominantly subscribes to the Sufi, the non-engaging or the privatization of religion, versus the imported or transplant movements that you have mentioned, and those who are coming from top down, trying to impose a will on the Libyan society, versus the social fabric of Libya that predominantly believes in religion being out of the almost close to separation of state and church as we know it here. So I don't know how you would see the role of the Senussi movement based on the makeup of Libya today. Thank you.
And then one last question over there.
Thank you, and I will be very brief, and I have a short direct question. In the report, I would like to hear where you draw a line between violent, non-violent extremism, and also, especially in the Muslim countries, it's very common to find conservative population, and sometimes it's confusing from this side of the world to see it as acceptable sometimes, like being conservative, and it's very important to clarify that, I believe. So I would like to understand in the reports where you draw a line between these categories. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to start?
You start with the
questionnaire.
Yeah.
Okay. The questionnaire started with asking about trends, like what kinds of religious trends there are, who do people go to for religious advice, who are influential religious leaders in the community. And then it went into, opinions about religious leaders' involvement in various processes and that were ongoing in the revolution, in federalism, and what was the third one? The political isolation law, those sort of issues that were brought up, as well as in education and developing, and women's rights. So that's just an overview, and I'm happy to share the questionnaire with you if you'd like. In terms of examples and anecdotes, right now nothing comes to mind that's very particular. There was a lot of negativity. And a lot of negative examples. The few positive examples in terms of who was promoting peace and getting to that part of the question was really those religious leaders who were also tribal elders, so that overlay of tribal elders who were also seen as religious sheikhs, or who were seen as religious scholars, and their role in being able to frame peace building within a religious discourse and being able to bring different sides together. That was given as an example of positive roles that could be played. So I think I'll just stop there because I think Zahra has a lot of things to cover, but I'm happy to continue the conversation after this.
So what were the questions?
The UN-led process.
That's an important question. I don't remember who brought it. Oh, okay. And I was planning on mentioning it because it's a relevant question. What are the take of these religious actors in the political map today regarding the UN-led political dialogue? And I actually have all the statements here for basically two institutions, the Dar al-Ifta and the League of the League of Ulama, or Rabitat Ulama Libya. And if we can say, of course, the Muslim Brothers, their take on the UN-led dialogue was very positive. The League of Ulama as well was very positive in different statements. And I'm mentioning the UN-led political dialogue because there was ideas about having Al-Ghannouchi to have a role in future dialogue, and the League of Rabitat Ulama Libya has a negative position from that proposal of giving a role for the Rashid Ghannouchi, giving his background that he's a Muslim or affiliated to Muslim Brotherhood. So basically, Dar al-Ifta, however, had a very negative attitude towards the UN-led peace dialogue. They were like the GNC is the religiously and legal official authority that should be represented, the Wali al-Amr, and they were they were discouraging revolutionaries to be part of the dialogue, and that they have to consult with their Wali al-Amr. So this is in terms of the religious institutions, Dar al-Ifta, Rabitat Ulama, the League of Ulama, and the Muslim Brothers. Both were positive, whereas Dar al-Ifta was very negative. The other question on Sunusi movement, I think, is a very important question, and this is why I had the idea to bring forth the background that was not part even of the research, because many in the findings and our recommendation were talking about, okay, if we can have, as my colleague was referring to, those who they identified as positive peace builders are the traditionally religious tribal leaders. And this, if there is any legacy to Sunusi movement, is that they were it was able to reconcile a religious movement, a Sufi religious movement, with the tribal tribal leaders. And here I remember, I always have it in mind, what Ibn Khaldun said, that in Bedouin societies, or predominantly Bedouin societies, you have to have, it's not enough to have a tribal asabiya. You need, in order to form a state, to build a state, a kind of a religious movement that is in alliance with tribal asabiya. And I think that the Sunusiya movement has managed to make this kind of reconciliation between the two elements, and not to offend or impose a super transnational or foreign ideology in the local communities. And this is why I think the role ahead is to revive at least, and I'm not referring to the Sunusi monarchy, but at least to revive the tradition of Sunusiya in our history, Libyan history. The other question was the drawing line between violence and non-violent extremists. How do we define violent versus non-violent extremists? Well, it was clear. This is why violent and non-violent extremism, when I mentioned that the two modes, or and I said that they are complicated and we cannot set them as two separate frames. The fundamentalist political Islam, and with all its variations, and with all its, there are some variations that are very moderate, but then even with the Ikhwan, specifically with, if you go back to Sayyid Qutb and the secret Tanzim, from the very beginning with Hassan al-Banna, it marks the first attempt in political Islamic discourse. You have a resort to violence. It gets undertoned sometimes and muted, and then it surfaces on the surface sometimes, and with their alliances, or sometimes with their conflicts against other forms of political Islam. The quietist Salafists, as has been shown in the case of Libya, also resorted to violence, and they're not quietists. And so these are all kinds of new forms of political modernistic Islam. We do have the other traditional Islam, the Sufi blended with tribal affiliation, that never had this kind of resort of to violence. It was active, as in the case of Umar al-Mukhtar, Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, al-Mahdi, but it was never a kind of a violence against its own communities. This is where we have the difference. And I'm not sure if I asked your question. Thank you.
Well, we are over time right now. Susie, what do you think? Should we continue with answering questions, or should we close?
We can continue informally, but we should allow people if they need to get off.
Okay. All right. So we're welcome to continue the conversation informally with you, but we will officially close this. And thank you so much for your participation. And thank you.